The porch light never came on, then the night decided to teach him a lesson. Ethan Cole stood in the gravel drive of his new cabin, staring up at the bulb above the porch. He flipped the switch again inside. Nothing. The sun had set, shadows had thickened into the kind of black you only get in the mountains, and the bulb refused to burn. Figures, he muttered, dropping the box cutter into the half-unpacked cardboard. He'd moved to Ravens Hollow to get away from his mistakes, a city layoff, a divorce, friends who weren't friends anymore. The cabin was supposed to be his reset button. The first night was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it came with a darkness that pressed against the windows like a hand. By 9, the woods were louder than the city ever was. Frogs barked. Crickets sang. Something cracked in the trees, deliberate enough to make Ethan freeze mid-step. Deer, he told himself. Or a bear. Or whatever they said at the hardware store. He poured bourbon into a chipped glass and told himself he was fine. Until the dog barked. Scout, his mutt, bolted to the back door with a low growl Ethan had never heard before. Not warning, not play, something darker. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and swung the beam into the yard. Empty. But the dog was staring at something. Not the trees. The corner of the house. Ethan followed the gaze. For a moment he thought it was nothing, just weeds. Then the light caught it, a glint of metal stretched tight between two posts, right at ankle height. Razor wire. The first trap. It wasn't old. It gleamed. The sort of coil you'd buy at a hardware store, the kind used for fencing, not for games. Whoever said it had measured the exact point where someone cutting through the yard would step. Ethan's stomach turned. He circled the cabin and found 3 more. One stretched across the path leading down to the shed. Another ran in a jagged line between 2 trees where he usually walked Scout. The last was almost invisible until his light kissed it, right across the back steps. The realization sank like cold water. Someone had been here. Someone who knew where he lived, how he moved, where his dog went. He called the sheriff. The man drove up an hour later, his cruiser crunching on gravel, his belly pushing at his belt. He looked at the wires, whistled low. "Damn kids," he said. "Kids don't set snares like this," Ethan said. The sheriff shrugged. "Could be some hunter. Could be somebody doesn't like newcomers. These hills hold grudges longer than tombstones." That was all the help Ethan got. That night, he pulled the wires down himself and balled them into a trash bag. Scout wouldn't stop growling at the windows. The watcher. For a week, nothing happened. Ethan unpacked boxes. He strung new bulbs. He even started walking the ridge trail again. Then came the letters. At first, they were just scraps of paper tucked under rocks on his porch. "You shouldn't be here." Then, "Leave before the dark takes you." The handwriting was jagged, childlike. The sheriff laughed when Ethan showed him. "Teenagers. Ignore it." But the dog knew better. Scout paced at night, ears twitching, teeth bared at corners of the room. Once, Ethan woke to the sound of low, deliberate whistling outside the window. The next morning his trail camera was gone. The mount was still there. The card was gone. And in the dirt beneath the tree, footprints. Boots, size 12. Heavy. But next to them, in the softer soil, a single small print. A child's. Size 7. Barefoot. The cameras. Ethan bought 4 new cameras. He set them around the cabin like sentries, all angled toward doors and paths. He wired floodlights. He slept with his old .38 on the nightstand. The first night, nothing. The second night, one camera went dark. The feed just cut to static. By the 4th night, all the cameras were gone. The mounts were left, screws twisted out clean, like someone had all night to work. One card was left behind, wedged in the porch rail. Ethan slid it into his laptop, his hand shaking. The footage showed the usual, trees moving, deer, the edge of the porch. Then a shadow. A gloved hand reached into frame and turned the camera toward the ground. But before it turned, the lens caught a face. Not a child. Not a man. Something in between. Pale. Smiling. Then the hand waved. Not frantic, not warning. Friendly. Like greeting a neighbor. The feed cut. The invitation. Ethan couldn't stay. He packed fast, called a realtor, listed the cabin for sale. But the mountain didn't care. The night before he left, Scout went rigid in the doorway, hackles raised. Something scratched on the wall outside. Not claws. Not an animal. Fingernails. Ethan raised the .38. His mouth was dry. The scratching moved around the cabin, circling, steady, dragging along the siding like someone marking territory. At the back corner, it stopped. Then came the sound of metal, twanging soft, wire stretching. He didn't open the door. Didn't look. By morning, the traps were back. 4 of them. Perfectly measured. Set in the same places. And in the dirt, beside Scout's paw prints, another barefoot impression. Small. Deliberate. Waiting. Aftermath. The house sold. A family moved in, husband, wife, 2 kids. Their porch light works. But sometimes, scrolling through his phone late at night, Ethan gets a notification from a real estate app. Your former address has new bookings. Vacationers. Families. Travelers. And always the same photograph in the listing, the porch at dusk. A warm light shining. Curtains drawn. If you zoom in on the window, just right, you can see it. A small face. Smiling. Waving. He said his name like an answer he'd been waiting to give. Mara Linton hadn't meant to take the wrong bend. She'd hiked this stretch of the Blue Ridge a dozen times with her uncle, always sticking to the marked trail, always following the bright slashes of paint on the trees. But that morning the mist was thick, her boots were slick, and when the path forked, she picked left instead of right. The woods were quieter there. Too quiet. No bird calls, no insects. Just her own breath echoing in the wet air. That's when she saw him. A boy, no older than 16, leaning against a rock like he'd been waiting for her. His hair was dark, his jeans too clean for hiking, and his eyes, gray, wide, and sharp. You lost? He asked. Mara froze. She hadn't heard him approach. Maybe, she admitted. I was looking for the overlook. The boy nodded like he already knew. Name's Jonah, he said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come on. I'll show you the way. The guide. Mara followed. Something about Jonah's stride was certain, like he'd walked this trail 100 times. He pointed out carvings in the trees, initials stacked on initials, dates cut deep into the bark. People leave their names here so they don't get forgotten, Jonah said. In case the mountain takes them. Mara laughed nervously. That's morbid. He shrugged. That's the way it is. They walked in silence for a while. Mara noticed the trail was narrower than the one she knew, old and overgrown. The moss muffled her steps, but Jonah's boots made no sound at all. Where are you from? She asked. He tilted his head, as if the question confused him. Here, he said. The cliff. The trees thinned. Suddenly, they stood at the edge of a sheer drop, the valley yawning wide below. Mist curled around the rocks like breath. Mara's stomach flipped. This isn't the overlook, she said. Jonah didn't answer. He was staring at the drop with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't awe. Something like longing. Then he turned to her. His smile was faint, almost sad. You should go back now, he said. Don't come farther. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped toward the edge. For a heart-stopping second she thought he would fall, but he stopped, standing right at the lip, toes hanging over. Wait! Mara cried. He looked at her. It doesn't hurt, you know. Not anymore. Then he was gone. The memorial. Mara ran. Branches whipped her arms, mud sucked at her boots. She didn't stop until she burst onto the familiar trail again, hard hammering. At the trailhead, she collapsed onto a bench. An older park ranger was pinning laminated papers to the bulletin board. Missing persons. Memorial notices. Mara forced herself to breathe. Then her eyes locked on a photograph. Her stomach dropped. It was Jonah. Same gray eyes, same dark hair. The caption read, Jonah Calder, 16. Fell from Bluefall Cliff, July 2013. Never recovered. The ranger noticed her staring. You saw him, didn't you? Mara's mouth was dry. That's impossible. He talked to me. He showed me the way. The ranger's face softened with something like pity. You're not the first. Jonah shows up now and then. Usually when someone's lost. Always leads them back. Mara felt her skin crawl. Why, she whispered. The ranger shook his head. Maybe he doesn't know he's gone. Maybe he just doesn't want anyone else to follow him down. The mark. That night, Mara dreamed of the cliff. She saw Jonah's back, the way he stood so close to the edge. She wanted to call out, but no sound left her throat. He turned, eyes pale in the dark. Names keep us here, he said. You'll see. When she woke, her palms were dirty. Mud streaked her sheets. And on the nightstand was a curl of tree bark, freshly carved with initials, M.L. Her own. The man asked for water like he wanted to borrow their lives. Marcus Hale had promised his daughter June that camping in the mountains would feel like an adventure, like a storybook come to life. After his divorce, he was desperate to give her memories that weren't tinged with tension. Just a tent, a fire, and the quiet of the ridge. By late afternoon, they had the campfire going. June sat cross-legged with a marshmallow stick, humming to herself. Marcus let the sound settle into his chest. For the first time in months, he felt peace. That's when the man stepped out of the trees. He was tall, raw-boned, with a sunburnt face and clothes that looked slept in for weeks. His eyes darted from Marcus to June and back again, never settling. He held no pack, no gear, not even a bottle of water. Evening, the man said, voice rough. Could I trouble you for a drink? Marcus's instinct screamed. Still, he unscrewed a plastic bottle and handed it over. The man drank deep, but the way he stared at June over the rim made Marcus's stomach knot. Got yourself a fine camp, the man muttered, wiping his mouth. Safe out here, huh? June shrank closer to her father. Marcus forced a smile. Yeah. We're good. Just the weekend. The man nodded slowly. Then, without a word, he turned and slipped back into the trees. The circling. Night fell. Marcus couldn't shake the unease, even as June drifted to sleep beside him in the tent. Sometime past midnight, he heard it, a dragging sound, like metal scraping rock. It circled the tent. Slow. Deliberate. Scout, the dog they'd left at home, would have barked. But here there was nothing but Marcus's pulse thundering in his ears. He whispered, it's nothing. It's nothing, though he knew it wasn't. The scraping stopped. Then came soft footsteps, pacing the perimeter of the tent. Once, twice. Again. Marcus clutched the hatchet he kept by his side. His breath caught when the footsteps halted, right by June's side of the tent. Silence. Then the faint sound of dirt being disturbed, scooped, pushed. By dawn, when he dared unzip the flap, his blood turned to ice. A ring had been carved into the earth around their tent. A perfect circle of gouges, dragged deep by metal. And in the soil beside June's sleeping spot, a single footprint. Bare. The false trails. Marcus packed fast. June rubbed sleep from her eyes, confused by his panic. They hiked down toward the trailhead, but halfway there Marcus spotted something strange, a lean-to, hastily built, hidden between pines. Inside were scraps of wrappers, a pile of cigarette butts, and dozens of small rocks stacked into towers. Watching markers. Worse were the trails. Thin paths leading off in different directions, branching like veins. Some circled back toward their camp. Others dead-ended at steep drops. Someone had built a maze. And they'd been watching. The file. Marcus reported it. The officer listened, eyes narrowing when Marcus described the circles, the lean-to, the barefoot prints. From a drawer, the officer pulled the file. Photos of hikers. Some young. Some old. All vanished in the same stretch of ridge. One photo in particular made Marcus's blood run cold. The same raw-boned man. Caught blurry on a trail camera 2 years prior. He's been here a long time, the officer said. Never seen twice in the same place. Folks say he don't live with the mountain. He lives as it. The shadow in memory. Marcus never camped again. June grew up, but she never forgot that night, the soft sound of dirt being dragged, the perfect circle around her tent. Sometimes, years later, when she closed her eyes, she swore she could still hear footsteps pacing. Patient. Slow. Always circling. He ignored the knock once. The knock did not forgive him. Sam Keller wasn't a superstitious man. He was 34, worked an office job in Asheville, and camped on weekends to clear his head. He believed in gear, maps, and common sense, not in mountain tales whispered at diners. That Friday, when the old man at the counter leaned over his coffee and said, "Don't stay and whisper past shelter. Folks don't come back right from there," Sam had just smiled. He hiked all afternoon, the forest dense, green, humming with cicadas. By dusk, the three-sided wooden shelter rose out of the gloom like a promise, roof, benches, a dry floor. Perfect. He set down his pack, unrolled his bag, and built a small fire. The air was still, but not peaceful. As the sky dimmed, the woods seemed to lean closer. The first knock. It came after midnight. Sam was half asleep when a knock sounded against the back wall of the shelter. Not loud. Not frantic. Just a single, deliberate rap. His eyes snapped open. Another knock. A pause. Then 2 more. Sam sat up, flashlight in hand. The shelter's back wall faced nothing but forest, thick trees, no trail. He aimed the beam. Only endless black between trunks. Woodpecker, he whispered to himself. That's all. But no bird knocked in slow, human rhythm. The whispers. He lay back down, trying to ignore it. The knocks came again, slower now, circling the shelter, one on the right wall, one on the roof beam, one at the floor. And then came the whispers. Too faint to catch words, just a susurrus like voices pressed against glass. The hair on Sam's arm stood straight. "Hello," he called, voice cracking. The whispers stilled. For a moment the night was too quiet, as if holding its breath. Then the knock came again. This time, right by his head. The handprints. At dawn, Sam stumbled out, bleary-eyed. The fire was cold ash. He turned to look at the shelter, and froze. The outer beams were covered in handprints. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They were small. Child-sized. Pressed into the wood like soot or ash, fingers long, palms flat. Some high up where no child could reach, others low, near the floor. He touched one. The mark smeared, but the wood beneath was indented. Impressions, carved by pressure. Sam's stomach turned. He stuffed his gear back into the pack and left the pass without breakfast. The diner again. On the way home, he stopped at the same diner. The old man was still there, still sipping coffee. "You stayed," the man said, not asking. Sam swallowed. What are they? The old man's eyes were pale, watery. He shook his head slowly. They're the ones nobody knocked back for. The last night. Sam never went camping again. But sometimes, late at night in his apartment, as the city hum quieted, he would hear it. A single, patient knock against the wall. Always on the side nearest his bed. He only wanted water. But he already knew our names. Mark Thompson had been camping since he was a boy. Now, at 42, he was determined to pass that love of the outdoors to his daughter, Emily. She was 15, sharp-eyed, sarcastic, and much more interested in her phone than in mountain trails, but she had agreed to a father-daughter trip in the Blue Ridge that spring. The hike was easy enough, the weather clear. They set up camp in a sunny clearing, shared trail mix, and argued over how to stake the tent. By dusk, Emily had almost forgotten she was suffering without Wi-Fi. Mark felt like he was winning as a father again. Then a man walked out of the trees. The stranger. He was in his 40s, flannel shirt clinging with sweat, jeans dark with filth. His beard was patchy, his hair greasy, and his eyes, those glassy, restless eyes, slid from the tent to the cooler to Emily before settling on Mark. "Sorry to bother," he rasped. "Been walking a long while. You got any water to spare?" Emily stiffened. Mark stood slowly, cautious but polite, and handed over a half-full bottle. The man drank with desperate gulps, water spilling down his chin, but even as he drank, his gaze kept crawling over their gear, their food, their tent. "You folks camping long?" he asked too casually. "Heading out tomorrow," Mark lied. The man's lips twisted into something like a smile. "Good. Not safe, staying longer. People go missing in these mountains." He turned then, drifting back into the trees. But not the way he'd come. Emily's whisper trembled. "Dad, he knew our names. He called me Emily." "You never told him." Mark's stomach dropped. The circle. They tried to sleep. At 2 a.m., the sound woke Mark, deliberate footsteps circling the tent. Not an animal. Not random. A slow, steady orbit. Then came the scrape. Metal against stone. Dragging, deliberate, circling them in the dark. Emily clutched her sleeping bag, wide-eyed. Mark gripped his pocketknife, every muscle tight. The steps and scraping went on for 15 endless minutes, then silence. When dawn broke, they unzipped the flap. The ground around the tent was scarred with gouges, deep scratches forming a perfect circle. Boot prints crisscrossed everywhere. Too many to count. And by the fire pit, half buried in the dirt, lay the empty water bottle Mark had given him. Except now, etched into the plastic with a blade, was one word. Emily. The escape. They packed in minutes, stumbling down the trail, not daring to look back. At the ranger station, Mark reported everything. The officer who listened grew pale. 2 hikers had gone missing days earlier. Their camp abandoned, their names carved into their belongings. And the description Mark gave? The filthy flannel, the restless eyes? The officer closed his notebook with a snap. You weren't the first to meet him. But you're the first who got away. The shadow that lingers. Emily never camped again. Even at home, she refused to sleep unless her door was locked and her window blinds drawn. Sometimes, when she was alone in the living room, she swore she heard it again. The scrape of metal, circling. Closer each time. The wind carried voices. But the ridge was empty. Caroline Dunn wasn't supposed to hike alone. Not after what happened last summer. Her friend, Riley, had slipped on a wet rock and vanished down a ravine. The body was never found. But on the anniversary, Caroline felt drawn back. She told herself it was for closure, a way to face the place where Riley had been taken. She parked at the trailhead before dawn, the mountains rising like silent walls around her. By noon, she stood on the ridge. It was exactly as she remembered, steep slopes on either side, the narrow path of rock with scrub grass clinging to its edges, and the view rolling forever into blue. Caroline closed her eyes. The wind tugged at her jacket. Then she heard it. Caroline. Her name, carried soft and thin on the air. She snapped her eyes open. The ridge was empty. The voices. She told herself it was the wind. Nothing more. But as she walked on, the whisper came again. Louder. Closer. Caroline. And this time, beneath her name, a second voice, faint, trembling. Help me. Her chest tightened. Riley. She spun in a circle, scanning the rocks, the brush, the endless drop below. Nothing. Just the wind pushing against her ears. Her legs trembled. She should turn back. She knew she should. But she didn't. She followed the whispers. The descent. They led her off the trail, down a slope she'd never noticed before. The ground was damp, the soil loose. Branches clawed her arms as she slid down into shadow. The whispers grew stronger. A chorus now. Some pleading, some angry, some sobbing. And one voice steady above them all. Down here. Just a little farther. Her throat went dry. That was Riley's voice. She was sure of it. She stumbled into a clearing. The air was colder here, heavy with rot. That's when she saw them. The mouth. Circles. Circles of stone, laid carefully in the dirt. Dozens of them. Each wide enough to stand in, each filled with nothing but dark soil. The whispers buzzed louder, rising from the circles themselves, as if the ground were speaking. Caroline staggered closer, hard hammering. The voices swelled, overlapping, shrieking now, too many to understand. She covered her ears. And then the soil in the largest circle shifted. Something beneath it moved. The figure. A hand broke through first. Gray. Thin. Fingers too long. Then an arm, a shoulder, a head. It wasn't Riley. It wasn't anyone. The thing pulled itself up out of the dirt, hair hanging wet, eyes pale and lidless. Its mouth opened and the sound that spilled out wasn't a scream, wasn't a word. It was all the whispers at once, layered and deafening. Caroline stumbled backward, but more circles began to stir. More hands. More heads. Rising. Crawling. The ridge itself was giving birth. And every voice knew her name. The last echo. Hikers found Caroline's pack a week later, abandoned on the ridge. No sign of her, except for the notebook tucked inside. On the last page, scrawled over and over, were 2 words. Not Riley. It only knocked when the window was closed. Eli Granger hated cabins. He'd booked the weekend rental only because his girlfriend, Lila, wanted a rustic getaway. The little place sat deep in the Blue Ridge, a single-room log box with a wood stove, creaking floorboards, and, worst of all, no curtains. By nightfall, Eli was restless. Lila had gone to bed, phone in hand, scrolling until her eyes shut. Eli sat awake on the couch, the window panes reflecting the firelight behind him. That's when the knock came. Not on the door. On the glass. A soft, polite tap. Eli jerked his head. The window showed only his own reflection in the dark. No figure outside. No movement. Just trees. Probably a branch, he muttered. He tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. The glass. The knock came again. Louder this time. Eli crept closer. The firelight flickered, warping his reflection. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass and squinted. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw it, another face superimposed on his own. Pale. Wide-eyed. Mouth pressed to the glass as if whispering something he couldn't hear. He stumbled back, hard hammering. Lila stirred in bed. What is it? She mumbled. Nothing, Eli lied. Go back to sleep. But when he looked again, faint handprints smeared the outside of the glass. Long fingers, too wide, too flat. The smiling. The next night, the knocks returned. Always at the glass, never at the door. Sometimes left, sometimes right, always when the fire burned low. Eli stopped sleeping. He sat on the couch with the hatchet across his lap, staring at the windows. And then, he saw it clearly. A face leaned against the glass. Skin pale as moonlight, eyes black pits, mouth stretched into a grin that didn't belong on anything human. It didn't blink. It didn't move. Just smiled. When Eli shouted, it vanished. But the handprints remained, slick with condensation though the night was dry. The door. By the third night, Lila had had enough. It's just your nerves, she snapped. There's nothing out there. She stormed toward the door, flung it open, and froze. The clearing outside was empty. But in the dirt, circling the cabin, were prints. Bare feet, hundreds of them. Small, large, overlapping. All pressed too close together, like a crowd had stood shoulder to shoulder, watching. Lila slammed the door shut, trembling. Eli whispered, "It doesn't want in. It wants us out." The last reflection. They left the next morning, abandoning food, gear, everything. When the cleaning service arrived days later, they found the cabin untouched, except for the windows. Every single pane of glass was covered from edge to edge in smeared faces. All smiling. At 11,000 feet, the trail ended. But the footprints kept going. Daniel Danny Cross had climbed most of the Blue Ridge trails worth naming. For his 36th birthday, he wanted something harder, higher, lonelier. So he picked the old ascent route near Mount Mitchell, closed years ago after a rockslide, now little more than rumor and overgrowth. The ranger at the station raised an eyebrow. "No one takes that path anymore," he warned. "It's unstable. Folks say the mountain doesn't want company there." Danny grinned. "The mountain doesn't get a vote." He set off at dawn. The air thinned as the trail rose, the trees gnarled and black with lichen. By noon, his calves burned, his lungs ached, but he pressed on. That's when he noticed the prints. Boot prints. Fresh. Leading higher. But he hadn't seen another soul all morning. The higher trail. He followed. The prints climbed into sections where the official trail had long vanished, up loose stone, across jagged roots, into fog that clung like cobweb. At one point, Danny crouched to steady the ground. The boot impressions were deep, but not spaced right. Too close together, as if whoever made them wasn't walking, but shuffling. Still, he followed. Pride pushed him. Curiosity kept him. By late afternoon, the path narrowed to a knife-edge ridge. The wind howled, cold enough to burn his cheeks. And there, in the fog ahead, he saw him. A man. Standing perfectly still. The watcher. "Hey!" Danny called. The man didn't move. He wore a parka the color of slate, hood drawn, hands dangling at his sides. His boots matched the prints. His face, Danny couldn't see it clearly through the mist. Danny waved. "Trail's closed, buddy." "You lost?" The man tilted his head, slow, unnatural. Then he turned and began climbing again. No rope. No pack. Just steady, shuffling steps upward. Danny swallowed hard, his throat dry. Something in his chest told him to turn back. But when he looked behind him, the fog had thickened. The trail was gone. The only way was up. The summit. By dusk, Danny reached the top. A flat expanse of stone, barren, featureless. No marker, no cairn, nothing but rock and sky. And the man. He stood at the far edge, back to Danny, staring into the clouds. The wind screamed, but the figure never swayed, never braced. Just stood. Danny forced himself forward. "Hey, are you okay?" The man turned. His hood fell back. His face was white, skin stretched thin as paper. Eyes black hollows. Mouth wide, too wide, filled with a darkness that wasn't a mouth at all. Danny staggered back, breath tearing out of him. The figure stepped closer. Each movement left a new print in the stone itself, pressed deep as if the mountain were clay. The final step. Danny turned to run, but there was no trail. No ridge. No trees. Only fog stretching endless in every direction. The figure stopped inches away. Its hollow eyes locked on his. Then it whispered, voice dry as dust. Everyone climbs. Everyone stays. And it placed a hand on Danny's chest. The world fell away. The aftermath. A week later, rescuers found Danny's pack at the base of the closed trail. His journal was inside, open to the last entry. Summit reached. Not alone. Fog thicker now. Prints ahead of me. I think they're mine. They never found his body. But some hikers say that on foggy days, fresh boot prints appear near the ridge, prints that lead higher, 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 into nowhere.